Welcome to this EDUcast from Telecom Reseller and NVT FiBridge. Our subject today is digital transformation in today's new world. With me today is the CEO of NVT FiBridge, John Croce, and I'm Gary Auden. And as we always do, we discuss our agenda. We're going to be focusing on an area which not everyone thinks about. Most consider digital transformation and think of the contact center, which is correct. But digital transformation also means you need to look at your network. And the entry of the Internet of Things makes your network even more important and a greater part of your infrastructure and also part of your business success. So we're going to talk about the LAN, infrastructure barriers, how you design for success, how we go from the traditional LAN design to new LAN principles, and why performance really matters.
I guess to start, I wouldn't mind we're going through some unprecedented times, and obviously we want to recognize and appreciate all the wonderful people in the world that are on the front lines trying to keep our world safe. So I think it's important that we take the time to recognize them.
Thank you. The continued expansion of the Internet of Things will definitely benefit us. What do you see as these benefits?
Yeah, actually, I mean, one thing that we're learning today is those organizations that have been able to adopt the Internet of Things are much better prepared to deal with some of the challenges that we're facing as organizations. Those organizations with IP-based collaboration tools could keep their teams better connected, more productive, no matter where they are located in the world. You know, organizations that have IP-based CCTV cameras that are using them enhanced cameras to detect temperature and fever and things like that to make sure their premise is safe. And of course, higher resolution cameras to identify potential suspicious activity in an environment. What we know is, you know, those that don't have IoT enabled are facing some more challenging times than those organizations that do.
Let's continue with that. You know, with any new technology, things like IoT implementations will have barriers. What are the infrastructure barriers you can anticipate?
Yeah, one of the things that many organizations face that have not deployed IP yet is the infrastructure requirements to connect the endpoint back to the application. And that is for many organizations that we help modernize. The biggest reason that they haven't is the disruption associated with having to rip and replace the infrastructure, the costs associated with that, the complexity associated with having to organize all of these things, and now more so than ever, the fact that there's limitations as to who can go into a physical environment and the type of work you do when you're there and the impact of that work on the people around you.
You have some interesting quotes here from Albert Einstein. What do they mean to the network designer?
Well, yeah, we apply these quotes. We always ask people to keep an open mind because what we're introducing is a paradigm shift in traditional thinking. And of course, the quote here, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, that's the definition of insanity. And now more than ever, you need to look at things with an open mind and consider different approaches to solving problems that you have. The second is all around the only thing that interferes with my learning is my education. And again, especially when it comes to networks, you see, education allows you to establish a methodology based on looking in the rear view mirror. You have experiences, and then you establish standards and approaches to take to resolving issues. But unfortunately, we sometimes allow that education to interfere with learning, because whenever there's a disruptive innovation that's introduced, it's truly disturbing your education, and that you need to be willing to learn about how these innovations can better solve problems for you. The third is, you can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And a good example of that in networking, if you recall, the very first IP phones when they were introduced, one of the biggest challenges at that time was quality of service and reliability. And of course, how that problem was solved was from the paradigm in which we created the problem. The creation of that problem came from layering a real-time application on a network designed for near-time data delivery. So given that we were already in that paradigm, the resolve was to look at methodologies to give priority to voice. And we've been able to solve these problems, but again, the question becomes, is that the most efficient way? Or is it because we were in that paradigm and not willing to look at out-of-the-box thinking, could we have achieved a better way of solving that problem?
I see we're going to be talking about the local area network. Would you talk us through some of the history and development of the local area network?
Sure. If you look at the very first data switch, edge data switch, was invented in 1989-1990 by a company called Calpana. And in 1994, Cisco acquired that company. And of course, for the first 15 years, the only endpoints that were connected to that switch were data terminals and printers. So the focus was all about, how do I get more bandwidth to that data-centric endpoint? However, the evolution happened where the Internet of Things was introduced, and that's everything IP, with IP phones being one of those first additional endpoints being introduced to the network. Yet the paradigm in which was established was to view things from the switch port out. And that is, let me put the data switch in place and get as much bandwidth to whatever endpoint in which I'm connecting, which was a paradigm established when every endpoint was data-centric. But as you know, many of these new IP endpoints are time-sensitive, real-time applications, and have different attributes than a typical data packet going, where you open a file on your computer and you wait for that file to get all its packets, and then of course the file opens. Well, a voice application can't work that way. Yet the paradigm was one from a data switch out perspective, and that's created some of the big challenges for customers.
Let's continue with the traditional LAN. It's really common. Most people have built their LANs as they always have. As enterprises move forward, what are the challenges do you anticipate?
Well, see, as new and more endpoints get introduced, as we hear more and more of some of the challenges customers face, given their paradigm was from a switch capability out, we're hearing the challenges, customers loud and clear, higher network cost, more complexity, security risks and concerns. We're hearing about data breaches at alarming rates today, more so than we ever heard in the past. Concerns about quality of service, also how long it's taking to implement these solutions, and disruptions to business. Reliability of ultimately the platform to serve the core applications as well as these new applications. And then of course, demands on your teams, as well as, ROI, the return on investment, and day two costs.
Network topologies are important, but I also think that quality of service and reliability are important. What are your thoughts, John?
Absolutely. I agree totally. Now, if you take a look at this diagram, this is a cross section of a building with three of the core networks within an organization. The middle one, which I call the profit and loss network, and that is the network that supports endpoints that provide intelligence to users so they can effectively manage their business and drive profitability for that business. So that's your traditional data network with IDF closets on multiple floors. Given the reach limitations of data switches, this is the distributed topology for that data-centric network. Complementing that network, you had a traditional voice network that was designed point-to-point, given the application. Of course, that point-to-point topology ensured every voice endpoint had dedicated bandwidth, so it ensured quality of service and reliability. And the video surveillance, or the protection network, was also designed point-to-point. And what we know is when you ask customers around, quality of service and reliability, which deliver the a better experience, a TDM endpoint, handset, or an IP-based handset, they'd all say TDM. And the reason for that had nothing to do with the actual technology of the phone, and had everything to do with the topology in which supported that endpoint. And what we know is whenever you can have a point-to-point topology where an endpoint has dedicated physical bandwidth assigned to it, which is anywhere between 100 and 200 times the required bandwidth, you're going to have quality of service.
Let's talk about the word upgrade here. When an enterprise considers upgrading the LAN, is that a rip and replace now as we talk about the new technologies we're attaching?
Absolutely, and this is the biggest challenge because, again, solving the problem from the same kind of paradigm that created it. Well, the original thinking is, well, let me rip and replace the infrastructure. Let me layer voice as a real-time application and physical security on my core network switches, and VLAN the requirements out, and everything's going to be fine. But for many customers, again, the disruption, the cost, the complexity, concerns around security, bandwidth requirements of the supportive applications, and the impact on the core business all create some significant challenges for customers. Yet, because there wasn't innovations in capability before, this was the standard approach that was established for organizations to get the benefit of an IP-based strategy, or the Internet of things within their organization.
Modernization was really a game changer as to how designers approach their LAN. Can you talk through some of the principles of new LAN design?
About 2 years ago, Frost & Sullivan came out with a new set of principles called the Modern LAN Principles. And what they were is based on previous years' research of organizations that took a different approach to local area network design for the Internet of Things, as opposed to ripping and replacing. And they studied some of these organizations, and they came up with these principles. And that is, instead of starting from the switch capability out, start from the endpoint requirements first. And that is, how much bandwidth is required? What is the impact of that endpoint being placed on my core network? Is that acceptable? What is the PoE requirements of that endpoint? To the extent I add an endpoint that has high power requirements, like an IP camera, am I considering my backup power strategy? And given I'm adding these high power devices, I'm potentially risking my business when a power outage if I don't increase the backup power. So by first looking at the endpoint, understanding their requirements, understanding their demands they're going to put on your core network, you can design accordingly, as opposed to just simply thinking my switches can handle everything, and not think through the potential impact on your core business. The second is build a sustainable LAN strategy, and that is go beyond today, your requirements today. What we know about data networks, that we went from 10100 to 1 gig to 5 gigs and beyond in the future. Well, when you're building your LAN today, given the endpoint, the IP endpoint you're deploying today, understand the potential impact in the future if certain components of your network requires greater bandwidth. Third is ensure a cyber secure, robust LAN, and that is make sure that you design the network not only virtually but physically as it relates to the local area network to ensure security. Be environmentally responsible as you modernize. So are there ways to reduce e-waste as you look to modernize? And of course, maximize a return on investment. You know, one of the biggest things for organizations is that they go through significant investments to introduce the Internet of Things within their organization. However, sometimes they're concerned whether the ROI is justifiable to the investments that you've made. So it's really important to make sure you're always looking at, am I going to maximize my return on investment given the overall strategy that I'm taking when designing my local area network? And the last one is leverage innovation, and that is innovation in network design as well as innovation in PoE switch capability.
As enterprises connect to more devices on their LANs, the resulting performance matters. Can you help us understand what's happening on this slide with latency versus packet size? And one of the points I think need to be made is on the far left, we're looking at voice over IP packets, and the far right, we're looking at video packets and data packets. So we're all over the place.
Yeah, so when you look at this report, like NVT Fibers is very proud of some of the PoE innovations that Frost & Sullivan was referring to. And this is actually our NVT Fibers Clear Switch, which is a switch that allows you to leverage the coax infrastructure within a location and provide 100 megabits full duplex symmetrical over that coax along with power to over 2,000 feet. So that solution was designed specifically for CCTV cameras in an organization, IPTV, bedside terminals within hospitals are being converted from your dumb terminal for TV to now a bedside IP-based touchscreen where it's TV, internet, phone for the patient, and it's records of all the patient's medical history for the doctors and nurses. And they're able to use this switch to enable that. So this is an example of comparing the latency of a Cisco Catalyst switch on 250 feet of Cat5e cable to our Ethernet over coax switch, clear switch on 2,000 feet of RG6 cable. And of course, the Cisco switch you would expect to perform as expected. They're industry-leading switches, very low latency. This is in microseconds. So, a good voice quality call requires 150,000 microseconds. And as you can see, for a voice packet, it's in the, 20 to 25, less than 20 microseconds. So you can see the performance of the Cisco switch being exceptional. But what's even more impressive is that our clear switch on 2,000 feet of RG6 cable is having similar performance capabilities as a Cisco switch on 250 feet of Cat5e. So now, if you were to try to extrapolate that and have to get the 2,000 foot reach, you would need multiple hops of the Cisco switch. So you need many repeaters or additional switches to get there. So when you add that factor in, the NVT FiberEdge Clear Switch has incredible performance when it comes to latency, jitter, packet loss, all of these things, comparable to industry-leading standard switches. And the full report of the test is available on our website, /performance. The listeners can actually could pick up all the details on the kind of testing that we've done.
You have more than just that clear switch. You have a suite of LAN switches. How do these switches simplify IP modernization that enterprises need to accomplish?
Yeah, that's a good question. When you look at our traditional data switches, of course, the commonality amongst all the switches is the reach of 328 feet or 100 meters, and the fact that they need multi-pair Cat5 or better cable, and they need all 4 pairs to support the requirements. Now obviously you have your lower cost solutions with fewer features, and then you have your enterprise grade solutions like the Cisco Catalyst switch that we were talking about before. Our Chariot switches are more enterprise grade given the feature rich capabilities of these switches, but they're also have different cable type supported. So you have single pair solutions that could go up to 1,200 feet. So over 1 pair of cable, you can support Ethernet and PoE over that single cable to 1,200 feet. We have the coax solution that we talked about, and we have the multi-pair high power solution that delivers up to 50 watts of power to 2,000 feet.
Let's go back to your land design. The initial land design, let's start off with that and discuss it and then move on to modernization.
Yeah, just so when you look at what you had before, you went to IP. So you had, again, here it's showing the voice infrastructure on the left, point-to-point topology connecting to your legacy PBX, or if you were a Centrix user, that would be out in the cloud. And on the right, you have your CCTV or protection network connected either via coax or UTP, multi-pair UTP, all point-to-point going back to your digital recorder. Totally independent from the data switch fabric that was supporting the profitability of that business and those users. But they were totally independent. So that's what you had before the world of IP.
As we move forward with all these added devices, how can you optimize your intent-based LAN? By the way, what is an intent-based LAN?
Well, an intent-based LAN is a whole area in which Cisco's putting a lot of effort in establishing a network that was based on the endpoints and the applications that you're looking to deploy. So having a network that's smart enough to make it easy to deploy different IoT endpoints and ensure that network is secure and robust. We say optimizing the intent-based network by leveraging these innovations, because when you look at modern LAN principles, so instead of ripping and replacing all the infrastructure where all these endpoints are now being connected to the switches in the IDF closets, what we're saying is you have this ideal infrastructure that was there supporting the traditional or the analog or traditional endpoints that you now want to modernize to IP. So you look at the innovations in PoE capabilities like our polar switch that's over single pair and our clear and flex switch. You can now transform that existing point-to-point topology and now deploy your IP endpoints. So what you have is endpoint segmentation on separate PoE backbones. However, convergence is capable through a single cable. So one cable connects you to your core network if you wish to have convergence. If you don't want convergence, you just don't connect it to your core network. But now you have a controlled environment in which to converge your network, a highly secure environment. But by segmenting the endpoints, you're also not only segmenting bandwidth requirements, you're also segmenting the PoE requirements. So now that's what we talk about optimizing intent-based networks, because in many cases, the intent-based network is focusing more on connectivity provided to those endpoints and is not addressing PoE, because many of these endpoints require power as well as connectivity. So we optimize it by allowing you to segment those endpoints, which then allow you to determine backup power strategies for those additional IoT endpoints, but not compromise your core business, because you've physically segmented those new IoT endpoints, yet you have the full benefit of IP because you centrally converged as well.
You're talking about the LAN design, but you're also talking about budgets, all right? And IT budgets are always under pressure to be limited or even reduced. How does the modern LAN modify and improve the budget?
You know what, that's a great question, a very timely question. When we look at what's happening with this COVID situation, and we look at what, the next year or so, we believe that budgets are going to be questions, and there's going to be constraints, and there's going to be more attention to getting a better ROI. So when you look at moving to the Internet of Things, you got to look at it from a customer perspective, and there's three components to a successful IP modernization, and that is the infrastructure required to connect the endpoint back to the application. There's the devices in which you're deploying, and then there's the applications in which you want to leverage once you've deployed everything that's required. So when you look at traditional network deployment, and you look at the history of rip and replace and the costs in which our customers and customers surveyed told us, is that cost of the cabling, all the IDF closet costs like power, backup power, cooling, the labor costs of putting that infrastructure in place ranged anywhere between $300 a port to as high as $1,000 a port for an organization like a hospital, where it's 24/7. There needs to be controlled environments when you're ripping and replacing, etc. The costs associated with putting a new infrastructure in place is significant. Now that takes up a significant amount of the budget, which leaves a certain amount for the IP endpoint and the application. However, what's important to note, the drivers of the ROI for the customer is in the endpoint and the application. And really, the infrastructure is there to support that ROI. Now, that rip and replace is high risk and high cost and very disruptive to the customer. So by leveraging modern LAN principles, you can change that equation. You could greatly reduce that infrastructure cost requirement, because now you're going to leverage that in the innovations that are available to you. You're going to reduce the complexity and cost because you're going to leverage an infrastructure that's already proven, but you're going to use PoE innovations that allows to convert that infrastructure into a robust PoE backbone for those new endpoints, which then allows you one of two things. It allows you to allocate more of your budget to that which drives the ROI, being better devices and better application, or allows a customer who's facing reduced budgets to still be able to deploy their solutions, because we could greatly reduce the infrastructure costs and allow them at least to start their modernization to IP.
I think what's interesting is you've been recognized by Gartner as a cool vendor. When was that recognition occur, and what does a cool vendor mean?
That was almost a decade ago that we were a cool vendor, actually. And why we were considered a cool vendor was because of our polar innovation. We were the first company to introduce a switch that delivered Ethernet and PoE over a single pair of wire with 1,200 foot reach, and which allowed organizations that had wanting to move to IP telephony to leverage that existing infrastructure.
One of the things I think we should summarize here is, are you saying that the modernized LAN can actually be a budget saver rather than just a cost?
We have collectively helped organizations save over $200 million in infrastructure costs, allowing them to reduce their budget overall if required, or reallocate those savings to those things that drive a better return on investment. And we're really excited about helping achieving that next $100 million in milestones of customer savings. And to do that, we're offering organizations a no obligation proof of concept We have network design specialists that understand modern LAN principles that could work with these organizations to help them. And we have some promotions on our lower port counts, our unmanaged switches that we have today. And so we're really encouraged with the kind of engagement we're getting with customers and partners. When you look at this whole thing of going back to the workplace, and everyone's looking at, how do I keep my staff safe? How do I ensure that people coming in to do work are also protected and safe? Well, when you look at the requirements of having to rip and replace infrastructure as an alternative, we have something that is almost zero touch in requirements. You got an existing infrastructure, we can be, our partners could be in and out in less than a day and have you fully operational on an IP-based solution without compromising your location or the people within that location. So we're really excited about the potential of helping customers through some of these challenges so that they can get the Internet of Things established and benefit from an IP-based capability like many our other organizations already doing so.
I want to point out on this slide, there is a good site to visit at NVT FiBridge. And the next slide actually has 3 more sets of resources that are available from NVT FiBridge to talk more about what John has been discussing. I'd like to thank you, John, for another enlightening EDUcast.